All right. Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming in today. It's right on 11 o'clock here at the studio. So I thought we'll just jump straight into it. Looks like there's quite a few more people kind of coming in, but we've got a lot to cover today. So I think it's best that we just jump straight into it. So, like to begin with, thank you all so much for making the time to sign up to this webinar. This is part of, I guess, a bigger series and a conversation that we're looking at doing here at our studio where we're kind of connecting with our audience and sharing some of our processes. Today, we're starting with kind of the value of a creative brief or how we might set that up. And I've got a series of slides and sort of templates that I want to go through with you all. To kind of talk about some housekeeping, I've got Catherine here with me. We've sort of set up this space in our studio, kind of purely dedicated for this workflow. But there's a comment section here. I'd love for anyone to kind of put your thoughts and sort of moments and things that you want to talk to me about. We're going to try and discuss them live, almost as if we were having a conversation with you. So if you think of anything, kind of slip it into the comments, but then we can also have an open discussion, at the end of this conversation. Today's really supposed to be about, I guess, informing our process and sharing that, with you. So if there's anything that I'm skimming over or if I'm rambling, then that's a great way for you to connect with me. So to get started, I'll pull up our deck. Okay, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of this land, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. So my studio is based here in Canberra and quite proud to be on Ngunnawal and Ngambri land. To any elders past, present and emerging that are joining us today, we welcome you. Okay, so for those of you that don't know me, I'm Tom Skeehan. I'm the creative director of Skeehan Studio. We've been kind of in this space, in the product design and industrial design space for about 10 years now, working very closely in the furniture sector. And we've got some amazing partnerships, with companies and brands all across Australia and now, pushing out, into the US, Europe and even Japan. So we kind of pride ourselves on being this material-driven, process-led, studio, and that's a mantra and a hook that I'd taken from Benjamin Hubert, who's a London-based designer. But at the core of it, it's just about this deep line of inquiry and investigation, and using materiality, I guess, as our hook and our guiding compass, and exploring that space and kind of letting it open up new opportunities. But as the business is growing and as the company is growing, a big part of our success is actually the brands that we partner with, the companies and the people that we work with. So again, just kind of focus a little bit on what we do. A lot of people don't actually know or are aware that outside of just product design or furniture design, we actually do a whole lot of other stuff in this space, especially in design thinking and creative team sourcing, working with government on design thinking, kind of problem solving, using this design process that we all understand, but applying it to different problems. A little bit more built environment, exhibition design, and kind of spatial planning and sort of user journey experiences, circulation mapping, and then a lot more visual, digital rendering and 3D kind of projects. But today we're here to kind of talk about the creative brief, and we decided to start this webinar series on I guess how to form and create a brief. Originally, we were going to start the discussion on the design process and talk about how we move through this whole kind of journey of designing and developing a product. But we thought it might be a nice icebreaker to come back to the creative brief. And if we can understand the value and foundation of a brief, then I think the rest of that process starts to make a bit more sense. So today I want to be talking about the power of a brief, like kind of why, what it's for. Less is more, considering that we don't need this huge essay. We're not trying to kind of spell out exactly what we want our design team to deliver on, but we want to be very clear as to what our guidelines are and kind of frame this project. And then lastly, we're going to be sharing a whole bunch of our templates and kind of the way that we work through a brief. I think it's also really important to reflect on the fact that this process, that even what I'm sharing today, it is changing, it's evolving. The way that I write a brief now is very different than what I did 5 years ago, and I actually hope it's going to be different again in 5 years from now. This is just about my understanding of the way that I navigate a design solution, my methodology, and the clients that I'm working with at the moment, and the way that I'm communicating with them, and the team that I've built, and how I talk to them. So this is going to be very different depending on where you are in your career. If you're running a much bigger team, or if you're selling different products, or if you're also a student coming through and looking to do some more self-directed projects. But I think the takeaway from this, regardless of where you are in industry, is that there's a sort of a series of questions that you need to be asking yourself and your client, or whoever's, I guess, responsible for this project. You want to be kind of looking at things through a certain lens. And that's what I want to try and capture today. So again, for anyone who's just joined us, looks like there's a few more coming through. Please put some questions in on the right and we can have a bit of a chat. Catherine's here to kind of pull up some of those and make sure that I don't skip over them. So the power of the creative brief, like this slide's here to kind of talk about what is the purpose of a brief and why do we bother making the time for it. I think early on, or at least in my career, I used to be given these briefs, and especially some of the ones that I would create for myself or my growing team. I didn't really understand why they were there. I was kind of creating them for the sake of it, or because I thought that they were kind of there to sort of define what was expected, the deliverables, but without realizing that it's actually a really powerful way for sort of setting the expectations and the lens that you'll see the project through. So it helps guide the design process. I call it bumpers. So we think about it on a highway, like we've got these kind of bumpers to contain us and make sure that we stay on a path. But it's a really powerful tool for us to connect with our client. So it's about talking back into our team and back to our client. And I've got a few slides later on that I hope will kind of expand on that. But I guess at that front point here, it's those expectations. Like, what are we doing? What does the success look like? And actually, what do you want me to deliver on? So the one-page brief, this is something that I've really been striving to create. And I'm going to show an example later on today of a one-page brief. I think it's a really beautiful thing if you can achieve a simple document and just hand that one asset over and go, this is what we're doing. And I think it takes time to understand kind of what's important in a brief and deleting out those things that can come later or are already understood. So as my team's growing and I'm getting a lot more capability here and we work together on projects, there's this sort of certain level of understanding and trust where the briefs don't need to be as complex as they used to be. But at the same time, given that the studio is growing, I'm working with more diverse clients and also with designers all around the world. So I need to be able to communicate with them. But that doesn't mean it has to be this 15-page document or more, right? This long, big descriptive essay. So try and carve out that way of just deleting and refining that brief down to that beautiful core message. And again, back to this conversation around guiding the client, giving them some information on the project, but also coming back into what our team needs. So I've broken it down into these 3 pillars that I think are really important for a creative brief. So whenever you're building out your brief, I want you to think about each of these and have you given them enough attention? So is your brief capturing the inspiration for the project? Like, that's really the tone, and what are we aspiring to achieve here? What are we rallying behind? What is exciting about this project, and why do we want to do it? Can the brief capture that? The strategy for it, like a big loaded word, but essentially what's our path forward? What are the blocks that we're going to be kind of moving through? There's so many different ways that you can solve a creative problem. There's different teams that you can build, different budgets, different timelines. But the strategy is just going to be that guide that allows you to go, what are our steps, in what order, and what do we prioritize? And then lastly, it's just this agreement that we're all on the same page. Really powerful tool for me, I guess, as a studio head. I'm passing this down the chain to my team. So there's expectations there that this is what we're delivering on. But I'm also going up to the client and saying, hey, this is what we're going to provide you. Okay, so the brief starts to position itself as this really interesting document that sort of sits at that threshold right in between. So to start with, we're going to get into this journey now on the first step of creating a brief. I decided to slow it down and actually talk a little bit more broadly about why. I think this is something that probably isn't emphasized enough in this creative process, and it speaks more broadly to, I guess, the design process or even sales, is understanding the why we are there. And I pulled up this book by Simon. I think this is interesting because the way that he's framed this map, and without going too detailed about his book, he's kind of drafted this diagram of these 3 circles. He calls it the golden circle. But essentially it's putting why in the middle. I think as designers, we're very good at understanding how or what. We jump straight to that what. What are we going to create? What's it going to look like? How are we going to build it? Who's going to build it? Okay, but we're not really understanding why. And it's this sort of level of empathy and deep connection with your audience, with your customer, and kind of asking these questions, but then baking them into the brief and into your design process. So I've snuck in a few great why questions. These are some examples that we would use kind of quite regularly, and questions that I will throw out to my team and have them in the brief, or they've often been answered in the sales journey. So in that process, in this first part of scoping the project. So why does this project matter? We want to ask that to the client. We want to ask that to our team, and even yourself reflecting on, writing this brief. So it's sort of identifying those projects' main purposes and aligning some of those goals and values. We've got why will our audience care about this design? So this is where we're starting to look through the lens of who this is for. Why will they care about this? And why might this project potentially fail? So jumping straight to that end of going, okay, well, why might this not work? And if you can think about that through the way that design could help solve that, you've started to identify a bit of a path for what you can do to achieve success. And then lastly, this kind of bonus one is, why did they choose this project? Out of all the companies that they could work with, out of all the different product opportunities, why was it this one? What is it that is valuable to them? A lot of the time, these questions can be hard for the team to answer if they've just been given a brief and just emailed this document. So these are the sort of questions that need to be supported from earlier on. So if I'm working with a client and we're kind of scoping up a project, I'm asking these questions so I can understand what their problem is and how I can solve it. That needs to go down the chain to your creative team. So the design process, I don't want to sit on this slide for too long, and I've deliberately simplified it here today. This is almost a webinar in itself, and I'd love to get into that in the coming weeks, where we talk about these 4 stages. This is often how I'll frame it to a client, where I'll say we've got 4 stages that we're moving through from, define, design, prototype, and develop. And a lot of that heavy lifting comes in those first 2. There, where we're in this sort of sales journey, we're defining the project, we're understanding what your problem is, what success looks like, and then we're moving into a design phase. But any designers that are here with us today, you understand that it's not linear at all, right? It's this loop that we go around, and very often you get through that design and prototyping, and you'll have these new realizations, new discoveries that then feed back into almost redefining the project. So when we think about a brief, we need to take that same approach. Yes, we are creating a document often at the front end of a project, but that doesn't mean that it's law. We have to understand that it's flexible. We want to make sure that we have opportunities to slow down and reflect on the brief and have the courage to go back to the client when we've made these new discoveries and kind of sell them in on this new direction. Okay, so the journey. I've noticed there's a couple of questions that are popping up. Oh, the one about a PDF. Totally. So all of these slides and this kind of presentation, I can send this out to you guys afterwards. There's a couple that I reckon you should definitely screenshot, but if you don't get it, just send us an email. We'll flick it through. Thanks for the question. That's awesome. Okay, so back onto it. The journey. I put this slide in this morning and I was tweaking it a little bit because I didn't quite know kind of what I was trying to communicate with it. But I think it's important to sort of pitch in on when the brief happens and why. So this is I guess a journey of the pipeline of a project, or sort of this sales funnel that we would talk about, where we're introduced to a client, we're understanding their problem. There's a salesperson involved, right? Let's just say that's me. I'm talking to them. We're framing up a project. Okay, but at some point we're going to move through into our creative solution. And in my case, the way that my studio works is that's when I'll start to brief up a project and pass it down, into my team. But it's this point right in between where we've got the client and that salesperson, or even a designer working in that role, framing up what that brief is. And they're talking to the customer and they're presenting back almost a version of the brief. So, which I'll get into in a few slides here. Often to win work or to communicate our process, we're guiding that customer through some of that early discovery. We're talking to them about what the project looks like. We're defining the deliverables. We're pricing up the project, and we're helping them kind of know what the journey looks like. So there's a version of the brief starting to emerge there. It's starting to come out off the page. Right? It's not really until you've properly won that project and had that discovery session and really gotten to know that customer that I think you can build that proper creative brief. But this is that document that starts to go back and forth, right? That slowly grows. And so what I've got in the series of slides that follow is these kind of bolt-in pages that we start to use at different stages of a project. And this is what I mean about a creative brief being organic and growing with the project. So here's our cheat sheet. I think out of any of the slides that you want to kind of screenshot today or take away, these are sort of the 8 headings that I think you want to have in a brief. Even if this is just on your notes on your phone and you're just trying to capture a project and text it through to yourself so you can remember, you want to be identifying these 8 steps, even as a sentence. So the company background, I've written it as a company because we're sort of framing this as my studio designing for another brand. Okay, but that's the client, that's the person, that's who we're trying to serve, that we're creating a solution for. But I don't want you to just jump onto their website and just copy their bio or their mission statement. Like, this is actually like a little bit more granular, where you're trying to really understand them. What are the things about them that you can empathize with that is going to help make this project a win? The scope and deliverables, depending on who's with us today, and I can see that there's a whole lot of different designers that have joined us. You're going to be working in different sectors with different deliverables. So if you're a branding agency, you're delivering a brand package or a website, compared to some of the industrial designers that are here working in homewares, your deliverables are very different. But this is where you quite clearly just scope out, this is what you're paying me for, this is what I'm expected to do. So your goals and vision, that's pretty straightforward, but it's actually, quite difficult to write a really nice goal statement for a project, especially trying to get that out of the client and tease out exactly what their goals are, and the vision. The target audience, often this is, again, really high level, where you just have this sort of vague understanding of a customer. What's been done so far? I've included this because so much of the IP and work that my company's done over the years is slowly starting to get packaged and documented. So all those documents are there. They're on our Dropbox. So that's a great resource for any designer trying to leap off from ground zero. So they can see examples of what's been done before, but also research. Today, we're talking about a brief for a chair. We've got heaps of data on manufacturers, on ergonomics, on trends, on pricing. All of that is there that you can be brought along as a resource when designing. Number 6, we're going to be thinking about our team. Who do we build to solve this problem? Sometimes it's just you writing a brief for yourself. Other times you've got to assemble a really big team. Our timeline and budget, and then the next steps. What are the actionable next steps that we need to move through? Cool. So the expandable brief, this is where I'm going from that one page, really succinct brief, which is like, that's the holy grail. That's what I want to get to, where I can just type out this one page, hand it over to my team, and we, drive through a project. But the reality is that briefs often expand depending on the scope and the capabilities of the team. So over time, what we've started to develop here at the studio is this expandable brief with these bolt-in pages. It's all templated to keep it nice and clean, but depending on the project and who's involved and the different stakeholders, I'm going to do a little bit of this work along the way. And this is just to guide the creative team. So I've got a few examples here. This might be a bit easier once you get this deck to sort of zoom in and see it later, but we've got kind of design territories. I've got one for our timeline, one for our team, and even a persona. And I'll show a few more of those in a moment. But this is a wonderful way for us to inflate the brief to get really specific. So because my company's doing a lot more digital rendering work at the moment, I'm finding that the briefs are very different. They're different to a project where we might be working on a chair. It's because we're targeting a different workflow and a different designer and problem. So we're starting to create new templates and new bolt-in pages that really talk to that workflow of a digital kind of project. Okay, so one-page brief. Here's a quick snapshot of a brief that I'd expect to hand down the chain to my team. And you can see I'm trying to keep it very lean and really simple. And I'm relying on my team to have a bit of self-directed learning and take on some initiative and figure out the rest on their own. So we just introduce the project, really quickly. We talk about what it is. So for today, we're talking about a company, Chairco, and they've come to our studio to ask us to design a new timber stackable hospitality chair. So it's quite a loaded little statement. Okay, we've used the word timber, stackable, hospitality, and chair. Okay, so that's already baked into what the project is. We've identified a goal, some of the features, where it's manufactured, price, and then the deliverables. So if I said to my team, we're going through stage 1 and 2 on this package, they'll know what that means. Under stage 1 and 2, there's all this stuff that we have to do and create and hand over. But my team knows that. We've got 3 concepts. We've got high-level DFM, which is a design for manufacturing package. We've got a model, quarter-scale model, 3D printed, and then a digital rendering pack. So that's what we've sold. That's what's expected, to be created. I love to have, an expectation of the due date and the hours here, or this could be a budget, could have a dollar amount. And then lastly, the client. So who we're designing for. And sorry, I've got a question down here. Oh, great. So the question is this brief used for internal or external kind of facing? It's almost both. Like, this is what I mean about that in between. I've got people here at the studio, like in my team, that could take this page and just completely understand both our mission, the capabilities of Skeehan, what 40 hours worth of work looks like. They'll look at the company, they'll go through the competitors, and they'll be able to start this project quite quickly. Okay. But again, if I'm working with a new team, or and let's say I've just hired a new designer that we're working with, and they're actually not in Australia, I'm working with them remotely, and they're amazing, but I'm providing them with a little bit more information to help lift the project off the ground. But this brief would go back to the client. It's almost in that invoicing kind of phase 1 stage where they go, okay, you're about to hand over your deposit to start the project. This is what we're going to do. That way down the line, when we start getting to that point where we're handing over and pitching the project and trying to get that last fee and also kind of have a win and have them excited about the project, we're refreshing this. So it might be 6-8 weeks before we sit and properly talk to them again in a big presentation in Sydney. I'd bring this brief back up again and go through each of the kind of sections, talk to them about it, and then that way that we're refreshing them on what their goals and vision are. Cool. So Eloise followed up on that question. Do you have a secondary document? Absolutely. So this is, and I'll show this slide a little bit later, I've got a link out where I've got a folder in our Dropbox where it talks about our design phases and our stages. So that's a webinar that I want to run next week where I talk about our design process, and we get really granular on each of those steps. What is included in a discovery phase of a project? What does the development phase look like, and kind of what are the expected deliverables? So happy to keep talking with you on that. Great question, by the way. Cheers. So then this is what I mean about adding more layers to a brief. Okay, so in this case, I'm like, okay, I need to kind of help our team along a little bit and do some of this work. And again, a lot of this happens in that sales journey. To understand a customer, to price a project, to really kind of know what the scope of work is, I'm starting to understand, what it is about their company that motivates them. I'm asking those why questions. Why are they designing this product now? There's a little question down here that sort of says, why offer up a new product into a new sector? And then I've got their answer specifically underneath it, where they sort of talk about how they want to be known as a company that can be trusted across this whole sector of products. And so we're adding in little details there that are unique to me because I'm the one talking to the customer, but you want to capture that so that it's in writing so you can come back. again, if you're working on multiple projects for different clients, you've got to put this hat on as a designer and go, okay, I'm working on this project for this brand today, solving this problem. You want to skim through the brief and have a bit of a refresher and be like, that's right. That's what this brand's about. That's what they were talking about. This is what they care about. So on the left-hand side, just at a glance, I kind of have some bullet points about their mission, their aesthetic. They've got a playful approach to design, this kind of distinctly Australian narrative. What does that mean? And then another link out to, their website, or maybe even not their website, a little bit deeper. Maybe there's an article that they've had on Design. There could be an interview of them, on YouTube. This is where the designer can get a shortcut straight through to listening to the client talk, seeing them in their space, kind of understanding those things that aren't on that surface level. Scope and deliverables. This is a bit more granular, but this is again where we're just listing out, what are we billing for? What am I here? What do I have to do inside these 40 hours? What is stage 1 and stage 2? This is pretty straightforward. This is just more of a list of the project scope. And then goals and objectives. So again, tricky to write a goal statement, right? But trying to think about kind of from the customer's perspective, why have they decided to engage with you, and what does that win look like? So if in this case, we've got design a versatile stackable chair for a hospitality setting. Pretty clean one statement. So if we can prove that we can do that, if that's the goal, and there's so many other things that they want outside of that, okay, but that's at the core of it. Then there's some objectives. So I really like unpacking these objectives because this is what I will use with my team in the critique process. So let's say we go through that first phase of ideation and we've got a whole bunch of sketches and discovery. That's when the idea is at its biggest. It's a big, messy idea, and we're starting to chunk it down, and go, okay, well, where are we steering this? How do we know that this is working? We're kind of looking at these objectives here and going, okay, one of the things that they cared about was longevity and comfort. They wanted to craft a chair that combines this enduring style with a robust build, offering lasting comfort. So does the product have this kind of in its DNA? Okay. Local manufacturing, another one that they've really sort of spoken to, was emphasizing local manufacturing. Is this product suitable for producing inside Australia, inside this network? Are we already pushing too far out of our envelope for our capabilities? So these little things help guide the project and keep those guardrails on that I spoke about. So that I'm all for creative exploration and pushing off into different tangents, but we still need to make sure we're coming back inside the lens of what the customer wanted. So then we have a persona. This is how I'd present a pretty straightforward kind of persona on a client, or like, let's say this is the end customer. So quite often if you're designing for a brand, they're your customer, but they're actually not the ones purchasing that product. So in this case, this is Minimalist Maddie. Maddie's an architect. She will be the one that is buying this chair from the brand that we're talking about. So first of all, we need to design the product for that brand and that company and meet all of its expectations. But we need to be thinking of it through that third person, through the lens of the actual client purchasing the product. So we're layering in all of these things that motivates Maddie. What are the pain points? What's her interaction with products? Does she like buying online? Does it take a while to build trust with this person? Do they need to feel the product, sit on it, test it? How do they define ergonomics and comfort, or even warranty in a product? What are these things that motivate them to spend over $1,000 on a chair? And if you think about it from an architect's perspective, they're actually not the end customer. There's another customer after that Maddie's specifying this chair for. It might be going into a business lounge at an airport. Okay, that's the true customer, that person there that's going to be sitting on this product and experiencing it. So we're designing a chair for a brand, but there's actually 2 or 3 other decision makers that need to fall in love with this project. So we need to capture them and empathize with them. So then I might slip in some key competitors in this space. Again, it's not pretty. I'm just dragging in some product, okay, to give them a head start. If you're the designer working on this project, I'd expect you to have a big map of a whole lot more products in this space. But what I'm doing here is just giving a little bit of a nudge. Okay. So this is often early conversations with the client. I might say, what are some brands that you think are doing well in this space? Who are your competitors? What's an example of a great chair? Right? We're grabbing all of that information and I'm putting it here. Right? Again, this is where the brief starts to grow. Once the team really get a handle on this project, they might discover other products, better products, ones that kind of really have moments to kind of steer a project. But we want to have something in the beginning, if you think it's valuable, to help your design team really understand who's in this space. So tone and messaging, this is where we're getting into this mood board territory. Mood board and territories, the next two slides. I think you could almost do like a whole webinar. Lost my video. Can I just get someone in the chat just to make sure that you guys can still hear me? Okay, so tone and messaging, right? We want to kind of discuss here, like what is a mood board, or what is a mood board for. Again, I could spend hours talking about the importance and process to crafting a mood board. Being like direct with your images and curating this page is really powerful. A mood board can actually kind of steer or derail a project very quickly. And I'm hesitant to allow anyone in the studio to create mood boards. And especially when I'm talking to the client, it's almost a different one than if I'm talking to my team. If I'm talking to my team, I can be a little bit looser with my mood boards because I can get messy and I can annotate out and say, don't like this detail in this image, but I love this one. And now our mood boards get a little bit kind of messy and wild. But I think as a designer, you can look at it through a lens and just go, okay, I get it. Tom's included this particular image because he likes, say, the introduction of plywood and steel. But then this image works really well because it's showing kind of a particular intersection or a joint. That can be a bit misleading to a client and a customer because they're looking at these images maybe from a tonal perspective or from a form, or even as a competitor. But I do think it's important early on in a creative brief to lead in with some mood boards, even if they're just there as placeholders and you're asking your team to refresh them and work on them themselves. I do think it's a responsibility of the designer to do the mood board because they're the ones who have the full picture of the creative scope. Okay, but the person writing the brief can give them a little nudge. So this is a new framework that I've been exploring for the last couple of years here at Skeehan, which is called Design Territories. And I actually got this from Vert Studio, Andrew Simpson, the founder of Vert Studio. And this was the way that he was talking to me in terms of framing up a way to explore a project. We're definitely getting into design process world now where we're thinking about, I guess, how to move through a problem or how to explore creative ideas. But I do like having this in a brief sometimes to help the designer split off into some different tangents. So if you think about this problem we're trying to solve, okay, we're trying to create a stackable hospitality chair made in Australia. There's so many different ways that we could take that project. And all three of them may still be a great chair that really hit the brief. But often there's one direction that makes the most sense, has the most energy and feels right for the group, for the customer. So what I like to do early on in this project is frame up that problem. What is it that we need to do? What's a win look like? But let's explore these three different directions around that same problem. So we're pushing off into this sleek and subtle design direction, a refined crafted, or a playful abstract. Now you have to write those words. You craft those two words depending on your project. So this is where you can get really nice and kind of granular on what descriptive words capture that project. But if your creative team's stuck, or if you're like, where do I even start with this project? Often having three territories that push off in three different directions allow you to fail fast and start to play in these areas that you may not have gone down if you were just following one direction that you feel like was right. So again, a conversation for another day, but I think it's nice to have some territories early on in your brief. I've also shown here a framework for the discovery session. To be fair, the discovery often doesn't happen until just after the brief's written. So the brief's been created, we've planned the project, we've scheduled it into our slot in the studio, we know who's working on it. Let's go engage with the client and do a discovery. But like I said earlier, sometimes a discovery has to happen almost pre-sale, where you're not quite kicked off the whole project. You're trying to figure out kind of the scope of the work. They may have even just come to you for this first little part, right? We haven't even begun the full design exercise. So if you've done discovery, build it into your brief now. If you haven't, just show the template for that discovery session. In this case, it's a really simple kind of exercise that we'd be doing with the customer. We would just be asking them about their business goals or helping them create them if they're a startup, kind of identifying their competitors, their primary and secondary, and kind of empathizing with their customer. What is it that motivates them? So we're doing this with the person that we're designing products for to help them kind of frame up what the project is. That's a discovery session. Again, if you've done it, perfect. Slip it into the brief. So this is where, to answer some of the questions that were in the chat, this is where we double back onto our resources. So this is just a templated slide where each of these are clickable links and they hyperlink out to our Dropbox. And in that Dropbox, I've just got a series of folders that have previous examples of work, ergonomics, jigs, our black book list of manufacturers, all the companies that we've worked with that have made our products, competitors maps, different brands, where they sit in kind of relation to price and value and customer experience, and even layouts. How do you put a concept page together? Share that, with your client. If you're building out a pitch, you don't need to start every time from scratch. We want to be optimizing this sort of into a template and giving that designer that toolkit and that kind of power to actually spend more time being creative and less time doing the things that have already been done. And we're getting right to the pointy end now. This is our project team. To be fair, a slide like this would normally just be a list because a lot of the people might know who it is on the team that we're working with. But I put it together like this today so we can kind of see who we're assembling in a project like this. So to put it simply, I've got the client on the left. I love writing out their names. I think it's important to get to know the client and that everyone in the chain understands that it's not just Chairco, it's actually Carla. That's who we're designing for. We need to understand Carla, and we have a connection with her because we're helping her and she's kind of, trusting us. So Carla's defined as a founder and the key decision maker. But there's also other people. It's never just one person, right? So there's also Emma, brand manager, and then Ryan, operations manager. So they're our client. That's who's paying us for this work. That's who we're trying to serve. But again, you dig a little bit deeper, there's other people that kind of weigh in on a project. So in this case, I've added in the sourcing company. So this is a company that Chairco might work with in Thailand for sourcing different components. There's also an internal, factory here in Australia. These people are going to have an opinion on the product and they will determine whether it's going to be a success or not because they need to fall in love with them. They have to manufacture this product and do it in a way that's profitable. Then we've got our team, Skeehan Studio, and what I'll be doing here is just listing out who's responsible for different things. So this list on the right, it grows, and lately it's been growing really big depending on the projects that we've been on, especially one that we're going all the way through to brand, art direction, and kind of product launch. Okay, but that's where we're kind of picking out the people who are working on it, giving them a name and I guess a title for that project. And that way anyone who gets the brief knows that, okay, if we're at the brand phase, we need to be talking to InkLab, okay, because they're the ones that are part of this project. Cool. I've got a couple of questions that I'll jump on here in a minute, guys. They're great. And then lastly, timeline. This is often given to the customer, to the client, like they're kind of going, how long is this going to take? What's the stages? How much are you going to charge me? But this is also great for our internal team. What's our deadline? What's next? Are we on a sprint and we need to do this in 4 weeks? In this case, 21 hours, right? Or is this something that we're spending 12 months on and we're going to move through a few phases? We might travel, we might visit a few factories, it totally depends, and it'll change the way that you approach the project. So you want to be clear upfront as to the timeline. And then lastly, the budget. I'm very transparent with the team here, disclosing how much we've bid in on a project, how much we're charging, what phase we're at, whether we're working with a client on just an early discovery, but we're looking to then kind of grow with them over a couple of years, and we've got this big pipeline. All of this helps the team, I think, understand that project, the context of it, and what we're investing in. But a lot of the time, I'll just present it as hours. How much time or resources are we dedicating to this? In terms of what I've scoped up, what I think we can then allocate. It also just helps you as the creative on it understand kind of what your milestone is and what's expected. And it's a great time to push back and go, Tom, that's cool, but I've noticed that you've kind of put in, in this case, the business goals, the discovery phase, and the opportunity matrix, only 6 hours. We haven't actually done a product in this sector before. I think we're going to need a little bit more time, and I might need to bring someone else in on the team. This is where you start to get that alignment, where the brief starts, you like air your grievances, where you're like, cool, love the project, but can we pull it off for that amount of time? Right. So this is a really powerful slide that I think often gets overlooked, where you just tell someone what to do, but you don't actually give them a framework. So that's it, everybody. We're kind of right at the end here, where like this slide is to sort of tease out where I hope this will go. This webinar was more of our attempt to connect with our community and start to share our process and pay it forward a little bit. I'm a big believer in this lifelong learning and self-directed learning. And I've been helped by some amazing studios that have gotten me to where I am now. And I equally want to grow through this position that I'm in and start doing some new and amazing projects. The only way to do that, I think, is to be really transparent and to share. So over the coming weeks, we're planning every Tuesday, we're going to launch a new webinar series, very similar format to this, where we just spend an hour, have a conversation. We're looking at covering topics like the design process, design thinking, kind of navigating a photo shoot, how to pre-launch a product, all of the things that I think we do every day here that I forget that people might be interested in. So if there's anything else you guys want to kind of comment on, like now's a great time to jump into the questions. And I'd also love to hear from you as to what you'd want to hear from us next. Thanks. Oh, we've got some great questions here in the chat. That's awesome. I think we made it inside an hour, 40 minutes. That's awesome. Oh, cool. How do you price competitively for new concepts? That's a really good question. It's difficult to sort of give a pricing framework out like this, but normally it's about understanding the challenge there. So what is it that we're trying to do, and how big of a mountain is that to climb? If we can overcome it really quickly, or even if I can help you overcome it and you can do it on your own. And quite often that's actually the case, where a customer actually is very capable and can do a lot of it themselves. They're just lacking sort of that confidence to kind of own a decision. So we just come in and just help with that early kind of positioning. And then later on, they'll come back to us once they might, want a bigger package. But usually I'll have like a work kind of process or a previous example of a project that we've done that might be similar, and then I can share that as an example of our pricing. But it's expensive. It's to get a winning product to market, it's a huge amount of work from a lot of people, and it can really extend, especially if you want to invest and dive into the entire process. Like, it can be a big investment. But I think the brands that understand that and that are in the journey from the beginning, end up seeing those results. Was it a client-generated persona within the brief, or is it research your team is doing prior? Oh, great one. Well, almost both. That was a persona that we created within the last 6 months. It's pretty fresh for a company. And then I've tweaked it a little bit for today because we're talking about Chairco. But there are overlapping personas because I do so much work into that commercial furniture sector. Right, it's say the ABW space, that activity-based working. there is sort of a common thread customer that we're servicing there. So if we're doing a new collection into that space, it's about grabbing that persona and go, has anything changed with this person? Or does this range actually identify with a different version of this person, a different version of that customer? So a lot of our work is for existing clients, or do you find most of the work is from new clients reaching out? Oh, that's an awesome question, Mark. At the moment, it's starting to shift. We're getting more customers coming to us from different brands, but it's because I'm outwardly advertising that. Early on in my studio's sort of earlier years, let's say, it was the other way around. I was designing almost for myself from Skeehan Studio, our own IP, creating our own products and collections, and then pitching that out to brands and going, hey, do you want this? That's still quite lucrative and it's successful. And I still do that a little bit. But I find that it's much more beneficial. You get a better result if you're chatting with that person or that brand early on and going, what do you actually want? Rather than me spend 8 months on this and come to you with a render or a model, or maybe I've already tooled up and completely made it. Do you even need it? Okay. Great questions. Any more, guys? Happy to hang out and keep chatting if you've got any questions. Maybe we take the time also to rate. Oh, here we go. Here's another one. What is the best way to get your name out there? Do webinars? Yeah, good question. Look, I'm not sure. I am sure actually. You have to just turn up and do work. Just be prolific and live this world and share everything. I talk with a lot of early career designers that are talking about breaking through into industry, and they're so afraid of sharing their process because they think that their work's shit, and they think that the quality's not there, and they want to wait a year till they're better, and then they're going to re-render their portfolio and share it later. What you want to be communicating to our tribe, our audience, is that you're committed to this lifestyle. You're committed to being a designer, and you live and breathe it. And so sharing your journey, I think, is really valuable. And I wish, looking back on my career, some of those awesome projects that I did that I didn't really document and I definitely didn't share because I felt like they weren't really good enough. But that adds so much depth to kind of who you are as a designer. So what you want to be doing, I think, is documenting everything and just putting it out there, sharing it all. And you will naturally get better. You will get good, and you'll build a tribe of people around you, and you'll hone your craft. Oh, great question, Wei. What are some resources, tools, and programs that you primarily use when developing these briefs? Sweet. So we've pivoted everything over to Figma. So previously, InDesign, everything that you saw here would have been previously done on Adobe InDesign in that whole suite and that world. But in the last 12 months, we've moved across to Figma. And if you're attending the webinar live, we're going to send you all a link to our Figma templates. I found it's a really great tool for collaborating with my team, so I can drop off a whole lot of stuff and we can move things around and we can play with boards live. But then also equally on the presentation side, just the linking and connecting projects and duplicating projects, having it all on the cloud has been amazing. So Figma, so far it's working out really well. We also use software called Monday. That's a project management tool. We deployed Monday because it was great for tracking all of our project management across the whole studio. So our WIP, our work in progress, but as well as our production. So outside of a design consultancy and service, projects, we also supply and manufacture product. We make, chairs for companies, or we control the manufacturing of our own IP. That's a huge kind of world in itself, and have an operations team, production management, all of that. That's all run through Monday as well. Then you've got bolt-in kind of pieces of software like Adobe Excel, or in our case, Google Sheets, and Xero for our accounting and software. What else do we use? Fusion 360 for all of our CAD. So most of the people that I see coming through are trained on SolidWorks or Pro Engineer and Creo. They're awesome. It's really powerful software. I've found that Fusion 360 though is good enough for our team. And sometimes we need to go out and extend into other pieces of software for some complex surface modeling. But 80% of the projects that we use, Fusion is awesome. It's really intuitive, it's easy to use, and the licenses are much more accessible. Yeah, Google Sheets. Get good at Excel spreadsheets. That's a pro tip. So maybe put in the chat, what do you guys want to hear next? If we're going to do this webinar weekly, I think every Tuesday, and we'll record it as well so we can send it out. But if we're thinking about next week, what do you guys want to hear? Oh, hey, Melissa. Thank you. I think everyone's jumping back into work now. Well, look, I'm going to wrap it up there. I'll sit on the line if anyone wants to keep chatting and ask any questions. But like that's it from us today. And really proud of all of you for coming out and listening to us. And we're totally here if you need anything. Ciao. Good question, Chris, about mood boards. Definitely. I reckon I could talk 4 hours on how to craft a mood board. Oh, nice question about how do you manage client presentations? Yeah, they're difficult. The pandemic helped in a way because it allowed me to let go a little bit and present online and get a little bit better at what my deck looks like. So the deck is your keynote, it's your presentation, it's your slides. So I started to invest more time in the way that I told a story through a PDF because I'd now have to email a presentation through or present it on Zoom, and then Zoom wouldn't work and it would lag and it would look really, crummy, and they couldn't read the text on the screen. If I was in person, I could show that on my laptop or have a conversation with them. I used to print out a lot of my presentations and go and meet with the client in person. So I found that client presentations now have shifted for the better because it allows me to reach a bigger audience. But it also means that I need to be really clear about my messaging. So I've been spending a lot of time learning about like design communication from a graphic designer's perspective, like thinking about these tools to pitch effectively. It can all be learned. There's sales tactics and there's sort of design principles that apply to this that I think are really valuable to learn. If that answers your question. Oh, nice, Mark. What do we got here? I'd love to hear more about managing the client experience, so communication through the project. Yeah, good one. I think communication is probably critical, and I've definitely had a few projects that have been harder to manage because the communication just hasn't been there, and it's either from myself because I'm distracted, or my team, and I assume that they're kind of in this conversation, but it's not happening. But people just love to be informed, even if something's delayed or over budget or out of scope. They want to know where it's at. There's nothing worse than going quiet and then trying to backpedal on it later. Often people are very understanding if you can just be transparent. So what I will have in my diary is almost an auto reminder where we've kicked off a project. So say we might start a project at the end of this month. We have a sign off and discovery phase. I'll put little moments in my calendar, okay, to check in with that client and give them a call. So I'll just set a thing in a fortnight saying call Carla. Right. Hopefully I'm already chatting with her a lot more and with my team and it's all happening. But sometimes life gets in the way and a few things push and a big project comes in, you get distracted. That little reminder goes, oh, better pick up the phone and just give them a call back. Hey, how's your week been? Just telling you, like, projects, it's going pretty well. This is where we're at. Do you want to catch up? Often a quick Zoom call and you share a few things on your process and the client's really happy. Also being upfront with your pricing, even if it's going to scare them and they can't afford it, have that chat now. Like even just this week alone, there's been plenty of projects that I put proposals out for that we're not going to win because we're too expensive. That's okay, but we've met them. We're part of their journey. We're going to still help them in other ways. Okay, but we've been really clear about what it costs. And then if I decide to change my fee proposal or come down, or if they're not ready, they know what we're worth and they can come back to us when they are. Okay. Dancing around price, it's dangerous. And I think learning how to talk about money early on and upfront is really powerful. Love to know problem solving strategies. How do you work through a creative block, writer's block for designers? Oh, awesome question. I'm loving where this chat's going. So I've definitely got a bit of a framework or like a toolkit, bolt-in things that we will do. One of them is the design territories for sure. So that's where I'll go, okay, we're stuck. We've done 15 concepts that all look the same, but what about this other direction? So we'll stop, reset, create some new territories. I love the idea of pulling out 3 words, like a different word that describes the project. So, let's just say a minimalist or a brutalist or a playful, a powerful single descriptive word that still links to the project somehow. But then riffing on that, going, okay, well, I've got this word playful. What does a version of this project look like that is, infinitely more playful than my other ideas? And then you have that ideation session, right, where you sprint and you create for a set amount of time. There's also another tool where I do like a lock-in 30-minute page sprint where for 30 minutes you just draw as much as you can and fill as many pages as you can in that direction or across that project, but also draw anything. Like you can just draw things in the space, right? Other projects, just sketch, just play, just immerse yourself. And eventually over that 30 minutes or an hour, you can sort of break into these other levels of just drawing. And then there's little moments inside those sketches that I'll go back through and do a little tick on each one and then revisit them later. I've done a video on that process on YouTube, but I might actually recapture it again because I'd like to add some more to it. But that's definitely a little tool that I'll use. Creative block. Another one is reframing the question. So it's a design thinking kind of process where we go, how might we? So we're looking at not the problem from the client going, design me a stackable chair. We'd say like, how might we? And then you create an answer to that. So how might we? Look, it's hard to do on the fly. Kat, you got anything? So maybe I'll pause that for now. I won't get into it because to explain it properly, it needs a bit of time. But essentially, if you Google design thinking on reframing the question, you're creating a how might we statement that helps reposition the project. What have we got? Oh, Kat's jumping in. Awesome. What's this another question? Thanks heaps for giving your time. Oh, you're welcome, Max. No worries. Oh, HSC projects. Oh, cool. Yeah, you're definitely in the thick of it then this time of year. One thing that I was chatting with the team about is like how do you connect with your audience or build an audience? I think it's about being inclusive in this part of that world. So I'm really big on leaving like Google reviews on other brands and businesses. So Evo Style in Sydney that we do heaps of manufacturing with. They're awesome. They're a manufacturer in Australia that is a subset of my industry, and I need them to do really well. I want them to grow. So I talk about them, I share them, I talk about them in webinars like this, I tag them on Instagram. But quite often, just as simply as getting onto Google and writing a review and giving them 5 stars, that actually does so much more for their analytics and for their business than talking about them now to us. So when you say, how can we connect or help and share, some of those really simple things like just sharing a post, writing a comment on Google, telling a friend, that's that word of mouth marketing that is really powerful. Cool. Well, let's ride on 12 o'clock, everyone. So I'm going to end the stream here. We'll package this all up and do an edit of it that we will kind of flick back to you guys and put it up online. And then Catherine's going to send through kind of this presentation and the deck that we watched today. But yeah, stay in touch. We're going to do this again next Tuesday, so we'll send you all an email. We'd love for you to sign up. We might also send a survey out just to see what content you guys want us to focus on. Thank you all so much. Have a great week.